I'm Captain Ellie Ernest, 32 years old, and I built my career in the Army the same way I built my life, through discipline and showing up when it mattered. For years, I carried my family through crises, co-signing loans, covering bills, even rearranging my life so they could move forward. But when they hid my invitation to the regimental banquet, deciding for me that I didn't belong, I faced a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been pushed aside by the very people you gave everything to? If so, share your story in the comments, because you're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand tall after being underestimated, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about setting boundaries and reclaiming your worth. What happened next might surprise you. I should have seen it coming. The shift happened gradually, like water finding cracks in concrete. My family had always been careful with their words around me, but lately there was something sharper underneath the surface politeness. Little comments that felt like pinpricks. "She doesn't really fit with that crowd," my sister would say when discussing my unit. Or my mother's favorite, "It's better when she keeps things low-key." At first, I told myself they were being protective. My family had never been comfortable with my military service, even though it had pulled us out of financial trouble more than once. They preferred the version of me that existed quietly in their orbit, the one who solved problems without drawing attention to the solutions. The pattern started with smaller events. Birthday parties for my cousin's children where the invitations somehow never reached me. Family barbecues that I'd hear about afterward through casual mentions. "Oh, you should have been there," my aunt would say with false brightness. "We kept looking for you." But when I pressed for details about when and where, the specifics became vague, the timeline mysteriously unclear. I began keeping track without meaning to. The gathering at my brother's house for his promotion at the bank where I wasn't told until the next day. The dinner for my father's retirement that happened while I was supposedly working late, though no one had mentioned it was scheduled. Each time, there was a reasonable explanation. A miscommunication. A last-minute change. My phone number must have gotten lost. The explanations felt practiced, too smooth. My family had always been good at managing narratives, at deciding who belonged in which version of events. I was learning that apparently I belonged in fewer and fewer. What unsettled me most was the tone when they discussed my work. Not hostile exactly, but dismissive in a way that felt deliberate. When I mentioned training exercises or commendations, the conversation would shift quickly. When colleagues called the house, there was always hesitation before they'd get me. As if my professional life was something embarrassing they had to tolerate rather than acknowledge. My sister was the most direct about it. "You know they don't really see you as one of them, right?" she said one afternoon when I mentioned an upcoming field exercise. We were folding laundry in my mother's kitchen, and she didn't look up from the shirts she was creasing into perfect squares. "Who doesn't see me as what? The people in your unit. You're not like them. You didn't grow up with their advantages. They're just being polite." I stopped folding. "What makes you think that?" She shrugged, finally meeting my eyes. "It's obvious. You work twice as hard for half the recognition. That's not respect, that's charity." The conversation stayed with me for weeks. Not because I believed her assessment, but because of how easily she'd said it. As if she'd been thinking about it for a long time, refining the argument until it felt like truth. I started watching more carefully after that. How my family's voices changed when I talked about work. The way conversations paused when I entered rooms. The small editorial decisions about which stories got repeated and which ones disappeared. My mother was subtler but more consistent. She had a way of redirecting praise that felt supportive until you analyzed it later. When I mentioned a commendation, she'd smile and say something like, "Well, you always were good at following instructions." When I talked about leading training sessions, she'd nod and add, "It's nice they give you those little responsibilities." The diminishment was so gentle it took me months to recognize it as intentional. My father's approach was different. He'd listen with apparent interest, ask follow-up questions, even express pride in my accomplishments. But he never brought them up later. Never mentioned my service when talking to neighbors or colleagues. It was as if my professional life existed only during the specific moments I chose to discuss it, disappearing from the family record as soon as the conversation ended. The exclusions became more frequent. More obvious. A family photo session where I was told the wrong time. A cousin's graduation party that I learned about from a neighbor who mentioned seeing everyone there. Each incident had its own explanation, but the pattern was unmistakable. I found myself double-checking information, asking direct questions about dates and times, trying to pin down details that used to flow naturally. My family seemed amused by what they probably saw as newfound paranoia. "Why are you being so controlling about this?" my sister asked when I requested written details about my nephew's birthday party. But I wasn't being paranoid. I was being careful, learning to protect myself from people who had decided I needed protection from my own life. The irony wasn't lost on me. In my unit, I was known for reliability, for being someone who could be counted on to handle difficult assignments without drama or complaint. I'd built trust through consistency, earned respect through competence. My superiors knew they could depend on me to deliver results without requiring management or ego maintenance. That version of me seemed to threaten my family in ways I was only beginning to understand. They preferred me uncertain, seeking their approval, grateful for their inclusion rather than confident in my own worth. The regimental banquet invitation should have been the wake-up call I needed. But I had become so accustomed to being forgotten that when it didn't arrive, I didn't question it. I simply accepted that I wasn't important enough to include in the formal ceremonies. It felt consistent with everything else. The gradual editing of my presence from family events. The subtle suggestions that I was overestimating my significance in professional settings. The careful cultivation of a narrative where I was grateful to be tolerated rather than valued for my contributions. I stayed home that night, reading and trying not to think about the celebration happening without me. Trying not to calculate how many of my colleagues would notice my absence or wonder why I hadn't come. What I couldn't have predicted was that someone would refuse to let the evening continue without me there. That my absence would be seen not as appropriate discretion, but as a problem that needed solving. That was the beginning of understanding how completely my family had managed to distort my sense of my own importance. And how much I had been willing to accept their version of who I was rather than trust what I knew to be true. The night of the regimental banquet, I sat in my apartment reading a novel I'd been meaning to finish for months. The book was good, engaging enough to keep my attention, but part of me kept listening for sounds from outside. Cars pulling up to the building next door. Voices of neighbors heading out for their own evening plans. I told myself I was content to be home. That formal dinners weren't really my preference anyway. That I'd probably feel out of place trying to make conversation with people I primarily knew through work. But the quiet felt wrong. Too complete. As if something was missing that I couldn't quite identify. Around 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from a colleague. "Where are you?" Commander's asking. I stared at the message for several minutes before responding that I hadn't received an invitation. The reply came quickly. "That's impossible. Everyone got one." I set the phone aside and tried to return to my book, but the words blurred together. My colleague was wrong, obviously. Or there had been some miscommunication about who was included. These things happened. 20 minutes later, another text. "Seriously, where are you?" "We're not starting." Not starting. I read those words 3 times before they made sense. The ceremony was delayed because of my absence, which meant my name had been on the list, which meant I should have been there. I called my sister. "Did any mail come for me this week?" I asked without preamble. "Mail? I don't know." "Why?" "I think I might have missed something important." There was a pause. "What kind of something?" "An invitation. To the regimental banquet." Another pause, longer this time. I don't remember seeing anything like that. But her voice had changed. Become more careful. The same tone she used when she was editing the truth. "Are you sure?" It would have been official looking. Probably with a military seal. "No, nothing like that." Too quick this time. Too definitive. I hung up and called my brother. Same conversation, same careful denials. No one had seen any invitation. No one remembered anything that looked military or official coming to the house. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. "Where the hell are you?" My unit's communications officer sounded genuinely confused. "The commander is refusing to start the ceremony. He keeps looking at your empty chair." "I didn't get an invitation." "That's impossible." "I sent them myself." Your name was third on the list. Third on the list. Not an afterthought or a courtesy inclusion. Third. I never received it. Jesus. Hold on. I heard muffled conversation, the phone being passed. Then a voice I recognized immediately. You need to get down here now. The commander's aide, speaking with the clipped efficiency that meant orders were being given. Car's already on its way. The line went dead. I sat holding the silent phone, trying to process what had just happened. My family had taken the invitation. Not lost it, not misplaced it, not forgotten to pass it along. Taken it. Deliberately. And then lied about it when I asked directly. They had wanted me to miss this. Had planned for me to stay home, absent from an event where my presence was apparently significant enough to delay the entire program. I looked down at my clothes. Jeans and a sweater appropriate for a quiet evening at home. Not remotely suitable for a formal military ceremony. But there wasn't time to agonize over wardrobe choices. The car would be here soon, and I had a decision to make. I could stay home. Let my family's plan succeed. Allow them to protect me from what they clearly saw as an uncomfortable situation where I didn't belong. Or I could get dressed and face whatever they had tried to shield me from. The choice felt larger than just one evening. It was about whether I would continue accepting their version of who I was and where I fit, or whether I would trust the evidence of my own experience. My phone buzzed with another text, ETA 4 minutes. I went in my closet and pulled out my dress uniform. The one I wore for formal occasions and official ceremonies. The one that represented the part of my life my family preferred to ignore. As I changed clothes, I thought about all the small exclusions that had led to this moment. The invitations that never arrived. The conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. The subtle but persistent message that I was tolerated rather than wanted. But tonight, someone had refused to proceed without me. Had noticed my absence and decided it mattered enough to stop everything until I could be there. I was still buttoning my jacket when I heard the car pull up outside. Walking toward that door felt like stepping across a line I'd been approaching for months without realizing it. On one side was the version of me that accepted my family's limitations, that made myself smaller to fit their comfort level. On the other side was the person my colleagues saw, the one whose absence could bring a formal ceremony to a halt. The aide was waiting by the passenger door when I came outside. He nodded once, efficiently, as if my delayed arrival was a logistical problem that had been solved rather than a personal crisis that had been exposed. They're holding everything, he said as I got into the car. Should be there in 10 minutes. As we pulled away from my building, I caught myself checking the rearview mirror. Not for traffic, but to see if any lights were on in my family's windows. If anyone was watching me leave. But the street looked empty. Normal. As if nothing significant was happening. Which was exactly how they had wanted it to stay. The weight of that realization settled over me during the drive to the banquet hall. My family hadn't just hidden the invitation on impulse. They had made a calculated decision about who I was and where I belonged. This hadn't started with the banquet. It went back years, to every time I had stepped up when they needed help. Every financial crisis I had quietly resolved. Every family emergency where I had rearranged my life to provide support they couldn't find anywhere else. I remembered my brother's mortgage application 3 years ago, when the bank needed additional income verification to approve his loan. I had co-signed, using my military service record and steady pay to guarantee approval. The house he bought with his wife and children became possible because of my signature on those documents. But when they hosted the housewarming party, I was told about it afterward. We kept it small, my sister-in-law had explained. Just immediate family. I was immediate family when they needed my credit score. I became extended family when they wanted to celebrate. The pattern was there in every major family event over the past 5 years. My nephew's school fundraiser, where I had bought half the raffle tickets, then wasn't invited to the awards dinner where he received recognition. My cousin's wedding, where I had helped pay for the reception venue, but was seated at the back table with distant relatives I'd never met. Each time, they had found ways to include my resources while excluding my presence. To benefit from my stability while treating my contributions as unremarkable. In my unit, the dynamic was completely different. I had earned my position through competence, maintained it through reliability. When superior officers needed someone for difficult assignments, my name came up because they knew I would deliver results without requiring constant oversight. I had worked with teams where trust was built through performance, where respect was earned through consistency, where what mattered was whether you could be counted on when stakes were high. That world made sense to me. It operated on clear principles: prove your worth, honor your commitments, support your teammates. Success was measured by results rather than politics. My family seemed to find this version of me threatening. The competent, reliable person my colleagues depended on didn't match the image they preferred to maintain. They wanted me grateful and deferential, appreciative of whatever inclusion they chose to offer. The car pulled up to the banquet hall, and through the large windows I could see the assembled crowd. Officers in dress uniform, civilian guests in formal attire. A proper military ceremony with all the traditional elements. This was my professional community. These were people who knew my work, who had served alongside me, who understood the demands and rewards of the life I had chosen. And someone among them had noticed my absence and decided it was unacceptable. The aide walked with me to the entrance. "Commander asked me to bring you straight to the head table," he said. "Your place is reserved." My place. Not a courtesy seat added at the last minute, but a designated position that had been held empty while everyone waited. As we approached the main doors, I could see my family gathered near the front. They had dressed formally for the occasion, my mother in the navy dress she wore for important events, my father in his good suit. My sister and brother flanked them, looking appropriately ceremonial. They had come to celebrate, to be seen as part of the military community, to enjoy the reflected honor of having a service member in the family. They just hadn't wanted me there to complicate the narrative they preferred to tell about themselves. When I walked through those doors, the conversation in the room shifted. Not stopped, but changed pitch. People turned to look, and I saw recognition in faces throughout the crowd. Colleagues who had worked with me. Superior officers who knew my record. Fellow service members who had shared assignments and challenges. The commander was standing at the podium, but when he saw me enter, he stepped away from the microphone and nodded once. A slight inclination of his head that somehow conveyed both acknowledgement and approval. The aide guided me toward the head table, where an empty chair waited with my name card perfectly positioned. As I moved through the room, I felt the energy change. Conversations resumed, but with a different quality. The evening could finally begin. I took my seat and looked out at the assembled crowd. My family was still near the front, but their expressions had changed completely. The confident social ease they had worn when they arrived was gone, replaced by something that looked like shock. They were watching me take a position of honor in a community where they had assumed I was barely tolerated. Seeing me treated with the respect they had spent months convincing me I didn't deserve. The commander returned to the podium and began the opening remarks. As he spoke about service and commitment, about the bonds formed through shared purpose, I understood that this moment was about more than just correcting an administrative error. Someone had refused to let me be erased. Had insisted that my presence mattered enough to hold up an entire formal ceremony until I could be there. That kind of recognition wasn't charity or politeness. It was acknowledgement of value that existed regardless of whether my family chose to see it. I spent so many years trying to earn their approval, accepting their version of my worth, making myself smaller to fit their comfort level. But tonight, in a room full of people who knew my work and character, I was exactly where I belonged. The realization was both liberating and heartbreaking. Liberating because it meant I could stop seeking validation they were never going to provide. Heartbreaking because it confirmed that the people who should have supported me most had instead worked hardest to diminish me. But I was here now, present and acknowledged in a community that valued what I brought rather than resented it. And for the first time in months, that felt like enough. The ceremony proceeded with military precision, each element flowing seamlessly into the next. Awards were presented, achievements recognized, careers celebrated. I watched colleagues receive commendations, listened to speeches about dedication and service, felt the particular satisfaction that comes from being part of something larger than yourself. What struck me most was how naturally I fit into this environment. The formal protocols, the emphasis on merit and performance, the way respect was earned through competence rather than granted through family connections. This was a world where what you did mattered more than who you knew. During the dinner portion, I found myself seated between two fellow officers I had worked with on multiple assignments. The conversation was easy, ranging from shared experiences to future plans. They asked about projects I was leading, sought my opinion on policy changes, treated me as someone whose judgment they valued. It was such a contrast to family gatherings, where my professional life was either ignored or treated as a curiosity. Here, my work was understood and appreciated by people who faced similar challenges. "Good thing you made it," Colonel Martinez said as the main course was served. Commander was pretty insistent about waiting. I almost didn't, I admitted. Had some confusion about the invitation. She raised an eyebrow. Confusion? It never reached me. Got sorted out at the last minute. That's odd. These events are planned months in advance. She paused, studying my face. Everything all right? The question was asked with the directness I appreciated about military culture. No dancing around potential problems, no polite pretense that obvious issues didn't exist. Family complications, I said simply. She nodded, understanding immediately. They don't always get it, do they? What we do, why it matters. No, they don't. Their loss. It was such a simple statement, but it cut through months of doubt and self-questioning. Their loss. As if my value was self-evident to anyone willing to see it clearly. I glanced toward the front of the room where my family was seated. They had been unusually quiet throughout the evening, speaking only when directly addressed by other guests. My mother kept glancing in my direction with an expression I couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe. Or reassessment. My sister looked uncomfortable in a way that went beyond normal social awkwardness. She kept checking her phone, as if looking for an excuse to leave early. But my father seemed genuinely interested in the ceremony. He was listening intently to the speeches, asking thoughtful questions of the people around him. This might have been his first real exposure to my professional world, and he appeared to be taking it seriously. When the commander began his closing remarks, he spoke about the importance of recognizing excellence, of ensuring that contributions are acknowledged regardless of their visibility, about how the strongest organizations are built by people who do essential work without seeking credit or attention. Tonight we honor not just individual achievements, he said, but the collective commitment that makes our mission possible. Every person in this room has contributed to that mission in ways both large and small. His eyes found mine across the room as he continued. Some contributions happen in the spotlight. Others happen in the background, noticed only by those who understand their true significance. But all are necessary. All matter. The applause was sustained and genuine. Around me, colleagues nodded in recognition of the truth he had expressed. Good work often went unnoticed by the larger world, but it was always seen by the people who mattered most. As the formal portion of the evening concluded, people began moving around the room, continuing conversations, making new connections. I stood to speak with a group discussing upcoming training exercises when I noticed my family approaching. They moved together, united in a way that suggested they had been talking among themselves. Planning what to say, perhaps. Deciding how to handle this unexpected development. My mother reached me first. "That was a lovely ceremony," she said with careful politeness. "Very impressive." "Thank you for coming," I replied, keeping my tone equally neutral. My sister was less diplomatic. "We didn't realize it was such a formal event. So many important people." The implication was clear. If they had understood the significance, things might have been handled differently. As if my exclusion had been based on misunderstanding rather than deliberate choice. My brother took a different approach. "The commander seems to think very highly of you." That was quite a speech. "He's a good leader," I said simply. "He recognizes good work when he sees it." There was a pause as they processed this. The idea that I was seen as valuable by people whose opinions carried weight seemed to require some mental adjustment. "Well," my father said finally, "we're proud of you. We always have been." It was the kind of statement that sounded supportive but felt hollow. A retroactive claim of pride that hadn't been evident in their recent behavior. I looked at each of them in turn. These people I had tried so hard to please, whose approval I had sought for so many years. who had hidden my invitation to this evening because they decided I didn't belong here. I need to speak with some colleagues before they leave, I said. Thank you for coming tonight. It was a dismissal, polite but firm. I was choosing to end the conversation rather than waiting for them to decide when it was over. As I walked away, I felt lighter somehow. Not angry or vindictive, but clear about where I stood. These were people who would always see me through the lens of their own limitations. Who would support me only when it didn't challenge their preconceptions about who I was supposed to be. But I had found a community that saw me differently, that valued what I brought and trusted me with responsibilities that mattered, where my presence was significant enough to delay an entire ceremony until I could be included. That recognition meant more than any family approval ever could, because it was based on what I had actually done rather than who they wanted me to be. The weeks following the banquet brought a new kind of tension to family interactions. Where before there had been subtle exclusions and gentle dismissals, now there was awkward overcompensation. Sudden invitations to events I would normally not hear about until afterward. Careful inquiries about my work that felt rehearsed rather than genuine. My mother called twice in the first week, asking about projects I was working on, expressing interest in aspects of my career she had previously ignored. The conversations felt strained, as if she was following a script designed to demonstrate newfound support. I was telling Mrs. Peterson about your banquet, she said during one call. She was very impressed. Said her son never gets recognition like that at his job. The comment revealed everything about her new perspective. My achievements had become useful for social comparison, proof of our family's success that could be displayed to neighbors and acquaintances. I was valuable now because my value had been publicly acknowledged by people she considered important. My sister's approach was more direct but equally transparent. We should have made sure you got that invitation, she said when she stopped by my apartment unannounced. It was obviously a bigger deal than we realized. It wasn't about the size of the deal, I replied. It was about the fact that you took it. She looked genuinely surprised. Took it? We didn't take anything. The invitation was addressed to me. It came to the house. And then it disappeared before I could see it. Things get misplaced. Mail gets lost. But her defense lacked conviction. She was going through the motions of denial without really believing it herself. My name was third on the guest list, I continued. The ceremony was delayed because I wasn't there. That doesn't happen for people who are just being polite included. She was quiet for a long moment. We didn't know it mattered that much. You didn't want to know. That was the truth underneath all the explanations and excuses. They had preferred to see me as someone whose professional life was insignificant, whose absence wouldn't be noticed or missed. It was easier than acknowledging that I had built something substantial outside their sphere of influence. My brother's response was different but equally revealing. He began asking detailed questions about military protocol, about the structure of my unit, about the responsibilities that came with my position. It was as if he was trying to understand a world he had previously dismissed as irrelevant. I had no idea the commander knew you personally, he said during a family dinner that felt more like an interview. Does he oversee your work directly? He's aware of what everyone in the unit is doing. That's his job. But he specifically mentioned your contributions during his speech. That's not just routine oversight. I could see him recalculating my position within an organization he was beginning to understand had its own hierarchy and standards, where success was measured by different criteria than the ones he was familiar with. The most significant change came from my father. He had always been the most supportive of my career choice, but in a distant way that suggested he didn't fully grasp what it involved. After the banquet, his questions became more specific, more engaged. What kind of training do you design? He asked. Who decides what skills need to be taught? I assess needs based on mission requirements and current capability gaps, I explained. Then I develop programs to address those gaps. So you're basically running continuing education for the entire unit. That's part of it, yes. He nodded slowly. That's a significant responsibility. It was the first time anyone in my family had used the word significant to describe any aspect of my work. The acknowledgement felt both validating and sad. Validating because it represented genuine recognition of what I did. Sad because it had taken public confirmation from outside sources before they were willing to see it. But the overcompensation felt hollow. Their new interest in my career seemed motivated by social embarrassment rather than genuine pride. They had been caught underestimating me in a public setting, and now they were trying to recover from that mistake. The real test came when my cousin graduated from nursing school and my aunt planned a celebration dinner. In the past, I might have heard about it afterward or received a last-minute invitation that felt like an obligation. This time, my aunt called personally to invite me, asking about my schedule and dietary preferences with the kind of attention usually reserved for honored guests. "We're so hoping you can make it," she said. "The family wants to hear more about your work." The family wants to hear. As if my professional life had suddenly become a topic of general interest rather than something to be politely ignored. I accepted the invitation, curious to see how this new dynamic would play out in a larger group setting. The dinner was held at a nice restaurant, the kind of place we went for significant occasions. When I arrived, I was seated in a position of prominence, next to my cousin who was being celebrated. Throughout the meal, various relatives asked questions about military life, about my responsibilities, about the career path I had chosen. The attention felt performative, as if they were demonstrating their newfound respect for an audience that included me. But one conversation stood out as genuine. My cousin, the nursing school graduate, asked about the parallels between military and medical training. About how you prepared people for high-stress situations where mistakes had serious consequences. "It must be hard to design training for scenarios you hope people never encounter," she said. "That's exactly the challenge," I agreed. "You have to make it realistic enough to be useful without making it traumatic." We deal with something similar in clinical rotations. Practice that feels safe but prepares you for real emergencies. It was the kind of professional conversation I rarely had with family members. Someone understanding the actual substance of my work rather than just its social implications. As the evening progressed, I realized that my family's new attention was both more and less than I had once wanted. More in the sense that they were finally acknowledging my achievements. Less, because the acknowledgement felt strategic rather than authentic. They were responding to external validation rather than developing their own appreciation for who I had become. The commander's recognition mattered to them because it came from someone they considered authoritative, not because they had independently concluded that my work was valuable. That distinction felt important. It meant their approval was still conditional, still dependent on outside confirmation of my worth. Still not the unconditional support I had once hoped to earn. But it also meant I could stop trying to earn it. Their opinion mattered less when I understood how it was formed and what it was really based on. The strange dance of newfound family attention continued for several weeks, but it felt increasingly hollow. Every overture, every expression of interest, every attempt to include me in events felt calculated rather than genuine. They were adjusting their behavior to match what they now understood to be my actual position, not because they had developed genuine appreciation for who I was. My mother's phone calls became predictably regular, always timed for weekend evenings when she assumed I would be home and available to chat. The conversations followed a pattern: polite inquiries about my work, careful questions about upcoming events, offers to help with things I had never needed help with before. "Are you eating well?" she asked during one call. "I could bring over some of that casserole you used to like." It was such a transparent attempt at care that it felt almost insulting. For years, she had shown no concern about whether I was managing my daily life adequately. Now, suddenly, my nutrition was a priority. "I'm fine, Mom. I've been taking care of myself for quite a while." "Of course you have. I just thought." She trailed off, unable to articulate what she had thought without acknowledging how little attention she had paid to my actual needs. My sister's efforts were even more obvious. She began including me in group texts about family news, forwarding articles she thought might interest me, suggesting activities we could do together. All things that would have meant something if they had happened naturally over time, but felt forced when deployed as damage control. The breaking point came when she suggested we go shopping together for something appropriate to wear to professional events. "I have appropriate clothes," I told her. "I know, but maybe we could find something really special. Something that makes a statement." "What kind of statement?" She hesitated, realizing she had revealed more than intended. "Just something that shows how well you're doing." There it was. The underlying assumption that I needed help projecting success rather than simply being successful. That presentation mattered more than substance, and that my family's guidance was necessary to achieve the right image. "I'm not trying to make statements with my wardrobe," I said. "I'm trying to do my job well." But image matters in professional settings. First impressions are important. She was trying to be helpful, but the help was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how my work environment actually functioned. In my unit, credibility came from competence and reliability, not from fashion choices or social performance. The most uncomfortable moment came when my brother suggested hosting a dinner party where I could meet some of his professional contacts. The offer was presented as a favor, an opportunity to expand my network through his connections. "I appreciate the thought," I said, "but I don't need help making professional connections. Everyone can benefit from networking. I know some people in government contracting who might be interested in military consulting work. I'm not looking for consulting work, but it could be lucrative. A way to leverage your experience." The conversation revealed how little he understood about my career goals or my satisfaction with my current position. He was projecting his own values onto my situation, assuming that financial optimization was the primary motivation for professional decisions. "I like what I do," I explained. "I'm good at it, it's meaningful work, and I'm exactly where I want to be." He looked genuinely puzzled. "But don't you want to maximize your earning potential?" "Not at the expense of work I find fulfilling." It was a concept he struggled to grasp. In his world, career success was measured primarily by financial advancement. The idea that someone might choose purpose over profit seemed foreign to him. These interactions taught me something important about the nature of their newfound attention. They weren't trying to understand or support the person I actually was. They were trying to help me become the version of myself they thought I should be. The version that would maximize social and financial advantages. That would reflect well on the family. That would justify their investment in showing interest in my life. But they still weren't interested in my actual thoughts, goals, or values. They wanted to help me succeed according to their definition of success, not to understand what success meant to me. The realization was simultaneously disappointing and liberating. Disappointing because it confirmed that their support was conditional and self-interested. Liberating because it meant I could stop trying to bridge the gap between who I was and who they wanted me to be. One evening, after declining another well-intentioned but misguided offer of help, I found myself thinking about the moment at the banquet when the commander had refused to begin without me. That recognition hadn't been about potential or possibility. It had been about acknowledgement of value that already existed. Someone had noticed my absence and decided it mattered enough to halt everything until it could be corrected. Not because of who I might become or what I might achieve, but because of who I already was and what I had already contributed. That kind of recognition didn't require improvement or optimization. It didn't come with suggestions for how I could be better or different. It was simply acknowledgement of worth that existed independent of anyone else's expectations or agenda. My family's new attention felt conditional by comparison, based on their revised understanding of my status rather than appreciation for my character. Motivated by social considerations rather than genuine affection, I began declining more of their invitations and suggestions. Not out of anger or punishment, but out of clarity about what kinds of relationships actually served my well-being. I was learning to distinguish between people who supported who I was and people who supported who they thought I should be. Between recognition that was given freely and recognition that came with expectations attached. The difference was becoming more important to me than the recognition itself. The distance I began creating wasn't dramatic or confrontational. I simply stopped accepting every invitation, stopped answering every phone call immediately, stopped making myself available whenever they decided my presence might be useful. My responses became more measured, more selective. When my mother called with social updates I hadn't asked for, I listened politely, but didn't extend the conversations with follow-up questions. When my sister suggested activities that felt more like performance than genuine connection, I found polite ways to decline. The shift was subtle but noticeable. They began expressing concern about my withdrawal, as if my previous availability had been the natural order rather than a pattern I had chosen to maintain. You seem distant lately, my mother said during one of our increasingly brief phone calls. Is everything all right? Everything's fine. I've just been busy. Too busy for family? The question carried an implicit accusation, as if my reduced availability was a moral failing rather than a healthy boundary. As if I owed them unlimited access to my time and attention regardless of how they had treated that access in the past. I'm here when things matter, I said simply. Everything matters. Family is supposed to be a priority. But they hadn't treated me as a priority when they decided I didn't belong at the banquet. Family had been convenient then, something they could edit according to their preferences. My brother tried a different approach. We miss spending time with you, he said during a rare visit to my apartment. It feels like you're pulling away from everyone. I'm not pulling away. I'm just being more intentional about how I spend my time. What does that mean? It means I'm choosing activities and relationships that feel genuine rather than obligatory. He looked uncomfortable with the implication. Are you saying our relationship feels obligatory? I'm saying some of our interactions have felt performative lately. Like you're trying to demonstrate something rather than just being with me. The conversation that followed was the most honest we had shared in months. He admitted that the banquet had been eye-opening in terms of understanding my professional life, that they had underestimated my position and importance within my unit. We made assumptions, he said. Maybe we were wrong about some things. Maybe? He sighed. Okay, we were wrong. We didn't understand what you had built for yourself. It was the closest to an actual apology I had received from any of them. Not just acknowledgement of misunderstanding, but admission of active misjudgment. The thing is, I said carefully, I don't need you to understand my work. But I do need you to respect that it matters to me. We do respect it. Now you do. Because other people confirmed its value. But what about next time? What happens when I care about something that doesn't have external validation you can recognize? He didn't have an answer for that. Because we both knew the pattern. Their support was reactive rather than proactive, dependent on social proof rather than trust in my judgment. The conversation marked a turning point in how I approached family relationships. I stopped trying to educate them about my work or convince them of my worth. I stopped seeking their approval for decisions they weren't equipped to evaluate. Instead, I began treating them as people I cared about who had significant limitations in their ability to understand or support certain aspects of my life. Not enemies or adversaries, but not reliable allies either. The change felt profound. Instead of constantly trying to bridge the gap between their perceptions and my reality, I simply accepted that the gap existed and stopped making it my responsibility to close it. My energy went instead toward relationships that didn't require constant explanation or justification. Colleagues who understood the demands of my work. Friends who appreciated my values and choices. People who saw me clearly and supported what they saw. The relief was immediate and sustained. Conversations became easier when I wasn't trying to manage how people perceived me. Decisions became clearer when I wasn't factoring in approval from people whose judgment I had learned not to trust. 3 months after the banquet, my unit received notification of a major training exercise that would require extensive preparation and coordination. The assignment came with additional responsibilities and recognition, the kind of opportunity that marked significant career advancement. When I mentioned it to my family, their responses were predictably enthusiastic. Congratulations, expressions of pride, offers of celebration. All the support I had once wanted desperately to receive. But it felt different now. Their excitement was based on understanding that this was objectively good news rather than appreciation for what it meant to me personally. They were happy because they had learned that my success reflected well on them, not because they understood or shared my actual goals. The distinction mattered less than it once had. I was no longer seeking their validation or trying to earn their pride. Their approval had become irrelevant to my sense of accomplishment. What mattered was that I had been chosen for this assignment based on proven competence and demonstrated reliability. That my superiors trusted me with responsibilities that would challenge and stretch my capabilities. That I was continuing to build something meaningful within a community that valued what I brought. My family's reaction was simply additional information, neither particularly important nor particularly troubling. They were who they were, with the limitations and biases that came with their perspective. I was who I was, with strengths and capabilities they couldn't diminish and achievements they couldn't erase. The banquet had taught me the difference between recognition that mattered and recognition that was merely convenient. I had stopped waiting for them to see me clearly. I had found people who already did. 6 months later, I received an invitation to my cousin's wedding. Not a last-minute addition or a courtesy inclusion, but an early invitation with my name properly spelled and my correct address. A small thing, but telling in its attention to detail. I accepted, curious to see how family dynamics had settled into their new configuration. The wedding was held at a vineyard outside the city, elegant and well-planned, the kind of celebration that brought together extended family from multiple generations. When I arrived, I was greeted with genuine warmth by relatives I rarely saw. Word had apparently spread about my professional achievements, and several people mentioned hearing about the banquet or my recent promotion. But the conversations felt different from the awkward overcompensation I had experienced months earlier. My aunt, the mother of the bride, approached me during the cocktail hour. "I'm so glad you could make it," she said. "Ellie specifically wanted to make sure you were here. I wouldn't have missed it. She's been asking about your work lately. Says she's considering military service after college." This was news to me. My cousin had never expressed interest in military careers during previous family gatherings. But then, my work had rarely been discussed in ways that might have sparked such interest. "I'd be happy to talk with her about it," I offered. "She'd like that. Maybe after the ceremony, when things calm down." The conversation with my cousin happened during the reception, when she found me during a quiet moment between dancing and toasts. She was still in her wedding dress, but had kicked off her shoes, looking radiant and relaxed. "Aunt Margaret says you might be willing to answer some questions about military service," she began. "Of course. What are you thinking about?" "Medical corps, maybe. Using my biology degree in a way that feels meaningful." We talked for 20 minutes about education benefits, training programs, the reality of military medical work. She asked intelligent questions about work-life balance, deployment schedules, career advancement opportunities. "What I really want to know," she said finally, "is whether it's worth it. Whether you're glad you chose this path." It was the kind of question that required honesty rather than cheerleading. "It's been challenging in ways I didn't expect," I said. "But it's also given me purpose and community I couldn't have found anywhere else." "Do you ever regret not doing something more traditional?" "No. This feels like exactly what I'm supposed to be doing." She nodded thoughtfully. "That's what I hoped you'd say." The conversation reminded me why I had been drawn to military service in the first place. Not for external recognition or family approval, but for the sense of being part of something larger and more meaningful than individual advancement. Later in the evening, I found myself seated at a table with my immediate family for the first time since the banquet. The conversation was relaxed, focused on the wedding and shared memories rather than my work or their attempts to engage with it. My father told stories about my cousin's childhood, my mother shared memories of planning family celebrations, my siblings contributed their own recollections. I listened and participated naturally, enjoying the warmth of shared history without feeling the need to prove anything or defend my choices. At one point, my brother mentioned a work challenge he was facing, asking for my perspective on managing team dynamics during stressful periods. The question was straightforward, seeking practical advice rather than trying to demonstrate newfound respect for my expertise. "The key is consistency," I said. "People need to know they can count on you to be the same person regardless of external pressure." "That makes sense. Thanks." It was such a normal interaction, the kind of casual exchange that happens naturally between people who respect each other's experience. No performance, no hidden agenda, just family members sharing useful perspectives. As the evening wound down, I realized that something had shifted in these relationships. Not dramatically, not completely, but enough to matter. My family seemed to have settled into a more realistic understanding of who I was and what I had accomplished. They weren't trying to manage my image or optimize my choices anymore. They weren't treating my success as something they needed to help me maintain. They were simply accepting that I was a competent adult who had built a satisfying life according to my own values. The change wasn't perfect. There were still moments of misunderstanding, still assumptions that revealed the limits of their perspective. But the frantic overcompensation had ended, replaced by something that felt more like ordinary family relationships. More importantly, I had stopped needing their understanding or approval to feel confident in my choices. The validation I once sought from them had become irrelevant to my sense of self-worth. When someone at work asked me later whether my family had ever come around to appreciating my career, I realized the question missed the point. Their appreciation was no longer the measure of my success. I had found my place in a community that valued what I brought, surrounded myself with people who saw me clearly, built a life that felt meaningful according to my own standards. Their opinion was just additional data, neither particularly important nor particularly troubling. The banquet had taught me the difference between belonging and being tolerated, between recognition and validation seeking. I had learned to distinguish between relationships that supported who I was and relationships that required me to be someone else. That knowledge felt like the most valuable outcome of the entire experience. Not the professional recognition, not the family drama, but the clarity about where I belonged and with whom. I belonged with people who noticed when I wasn't there and refused to proceed without me. People who valued my contributions and trusted my judgment. People who saw my presence as essential rather than optional. Everything else was just background noise. That night taught me something simple but powerful. Sometimes the people who should support you most will be the first to hold you back. But when you stop waiting for their approval, you find out who truly values you. Have you ever had family or friends try to downplay your success? How did you handle it? And do you think it's better to confront them head-on or to quietly set boundaries and move forward? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want more true stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your worth.